Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hi, and welcome to Our Curious Amalgam, the podcast from the American Bar Association section of Antitrust Law. My name is John Roberti, and today's topic is: do the bids look the same? The role and progress of the DOJ Procurement Collusion Strike Force. In the antitrust world, we often hear about cartels, and they are typically large, coordinated efforts by competitors to raise prices to customers in the market, and consumers suffer. But there is also a very important mission of the government, and that is to make sure that when the government is a buyer, that it's not being taken advantage of. A group at the Department of Justice, working with the FBI and other law enforcement, has been focused on this issue for a few years and frankly has made quite a bit of progress. Today, we're going to talk to a lawyer and an FBI agent about what's going on at the DOJ Procurement Collusion Strike Force. My co-host today is Wendy Waszmer.
Hey, John. How you doing?
Wendy, what are we doing today?
Today, we have a great program on the DOJ's Procurement Collusion Strike Force, and we've got two guests. One is the director and a DOJ prosecutor, and the second is an FBI agent who works on the strike force.
Great. Well, what is the strike force?
So they will tell you about their work, but it's an enforcement initiative that is going after federal felonies in bidding and other procurement scenarios. So crimes against the government and crimes against victims who use government services.
Who are our guests? So
we are really excited to have Daniel Glad, who's the director of the Strike Force. And then we have Kelvin Ortiz, who's the Supervisory Special Agent with the FBI, who's working with Dan with this Strike Force.
Dan, Kelvin, welcome to the program.
Hello, John, Wendy. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you. So maybe we can start out. I'd love to just start out with a question about the types of crimes. So when I was at DOJ, I was often really surprised by the schemes that people had. So would love to introduce our audience to the types of crimes you are looking at and that you uncover, because I'm not sure everyone knows what collusion bidding crimes are.
Sure. So our marching orders, our mandate is any criminal conduct that undermines or distorts, subverts or perverts the competitive process when the government buys goods or services. And when people hear procurement, sure, they may think paper clips in the supply closet, and that's something the government buys, and that is procurement. But it's a lot larger than that, too. It's the roads we drive on. It's the buses we take during our commute, back when we had a commute. It's the water lines that bring tap water to our houses. It's any time the government, and what we're looking at is anything at the federal, state, or local level, the government's spending money to buy goods or services. That's sort of the universe we're looking at. And so you asked about the crimes. We'll sort of start with, I'm coming from the Antitrust Division. So, of course, Title 15, the Sherman Act, bid rigging, price fixing, market allocation, sort of the big three per se offenses. That's been our North Star for a long time, but it's bigger than that. We'll look at any sort of the Title 18. Title 18 is the part of the U.S. Code where a number of the other federal criminal violations are found. So your fraud against the government, mail fraud, wire fraud, theft or bribery from federally funded programs. We have a lot of tools in the U.S. Code, a lot of tools in the toolbox. Again, if it's the conduct that undermines or distorts the competitive process, that's what we're going after.
Yeah. And so let me just throw this out, maybe to both of you, but maybe we'll start with Kelvin. So what is the kind of scenario when you get a lead, and maybe you can tell us what are the kinds of federal programs or the kinds of places where industries or different types of procurement where you have found this kind of crime? Like when do you find a crime, a procurement bidding crime?
So let me tell you, often, a lot of times, and I'll guide you through the way that we get a lot of our cases. And we partner with the Department of Justice Antitrust Division. The cases come from the leniency program. So a lot of the corporations who identified these potential antitrust violations, they come to the Department of Justice. And then, as I said, we partner with DOJ, and then we investigate the crimes. We also have other ways that we identify and we get the referrals, and those are often we have whistleblowers, and those are former, current employees who have evidence and knowledge of the schemes, and they often come forward and they come to the FBI, whether it's through providing information through our online tip line, or also they come straight to a local FBI office and they provide what we call a walk-in complaint.
Right. And so the type of person who's going to be a whistleblower, I remember when I was at the DOJ, there were highway cases, there were hurricane cases. So maybe Dan, who's the person who comes and says a crime's happened? I mean, is it the guy, paving the highway, or what's the type of person that comes to you and says, I really think something's afoot? And what are they saying to you when they come in?
It runs the gamut, and the people who come to DOJ and the Strike Force, we have a sort of a public-facing tip line on our website. It really runs the gamut. You'll get the person who says, "My boss asked me to do this. Is this illegal?" They're almost coming to us for legal advice. And Wendy, we can't provide legal advice. I have but one client. It's the United States of America, and they want to know what they should do. Sometimes, and so those will be could be people in an administrative or support role who've been asked to send an email, or maybe a few years ago, fax something to a competitor, fax a bid to a competitor. You'll have people who have sales roles. You'll have people throughout. If it's a large integrated company, they could be from anywhere in the company. You asked about the highway. As a much younger man, I actually worked at an asphalt company. I will tell you, at the asphalt plant and in the gravel pit, I never had an opportunity to see any of the bids or anything like that. So, but it's generally someone who's going to interface with the sales or the contracts or something like that. Other people we'll hear from, people who are in the industry, people who see that there's an old boys club and aren't part of it, or people who've been invited in but don't want to do it. We had in one case I'm thinking of, we had someone who was a new entrant into bidding for government business, put in a bid and started getting harassed by the ringleader of a cartel, of a conspiracy. And this new entrant called a hotline saying, "I'm being bullied and harassed. Can you stop the bullying and harassment?" And luckily, the special agent who got this hotline complaint said, "Wait a minute, this isn't bullying and harassment. This is an active collusive conspiracy, and we have some opportunities here." So the people who are coming in really do run the gamut.
Go ahead.
And I'll add, Dan, also, and this is something that I've seen personally when I work securities fraud. And sometimes we could be debriefing somebody for an unrelated crime, whether it's a violent crime offense, a Ponzi scheme, and the antitrust topic would come up. And often, we start developing the relationship with the person, and then expanding, debriefing the individual, and then we often open spin-off investigations that become large, and we've seen it here in the FBI, very large cases.
Oh, that's a great point, Kelvin. And it is, when it comes out, is it basically like you're investigating some other sort of fraud, and then you realize that it's collusive, like you hear something about competitors. Is that how you get the lead for the procurement?
Correct.
Collusion?
And you'll have a cooperator who, they come to the table and they're, we're debriefing him on like I said, a securities fraud case, and they might at the end of the debriefing say, and by the way, I have information on this company that I worked with, and do you want to know about it? And then, we start like listening to what they have to say. And then, at the end of the interview, we say, well, this is antitrust. And then, we partner with DOJ. We also partner with our OIG folks. And then we do spin-off cases.
So Kelvin, you're actually leading into another kind of great topic. You talked about some of the other work you did. How did you come to the FBI? Like, what's it like to be an FBI agent? I know a lot of our listeners are pretty fascinated with the job you do.
Okay, so I'll give you a little background. I growing up, this is what led me to become an FBI agent. Growing up, I saw a lot of corruption in the area where I lived, and it was always like seeing the FBI, the stories of that the FBI investigating the corruption, and often the corruption had an angle that was bid rigging, and we still see it. This is 20 years later, we still see the same pattern. So that hasn't gone away. I joined the government 2004, and that's when I remember going through my fingerprint process and going to the local FBI office to get my fingerprints, and it was an FBI agent like doing my fingerprints, and for me that was like awesome. And I said that's what led me to say, you know what, this is what I want to do. And so I joined in 2004. I spent 10 years doing audits for different OIGs, and then it wasn't until 2014 when I became officially an agent, and the best job in the world, in my opinion.
Oh, that's amazing.
So I'm biased.
And you all will remember, both you and Dana will remember the days of the I think I had the 6 different fingerprint cards. And I was like, do I really need to do every single finger? And I was like, can I really be a security risk?
I just want to clarify, Wendy, you had 6 fingerprint cards because you have 6 fingers? Not on one hand, right?
It was basically like, and I'm going to send this one to Fort Knox and this one, and this was like insane. I remember I was doing this finger. So let me put the same question to you, Dan, about how you ended up. I know you have an interesting kind of way to be ending up as the director of the Strike Force.
Well, I started out of law school. I worked at a large law firm for several years, but I think I've always kind of had. I've always sort of wanted to bend the moral arc of the universe towards justice, or do what little part I can to help bend that arc. Putting on the white hat, trying to do good, and I was able to see some of the best people, sort of in terms of humans, and some of the best lawyers I worked with in private practice. So I'm thinking back to some of the partners I worked with. There was one thing that they all had in common, is they were former federal prosecutors. And I had sort of identified early on that this is something I really wanted to aim toward. And I've been, after leaving my law firm, I was an assistant inspector general in the city of Chicago, which is an office, and it's a great office, designed to root out fraud, waste, and corruption in the city of Chicago's government. And that is a target-rich environment. I don't think that's a controversial statement. And working with a former AUSA from the Northern District of Illinois, and then eventually coming into the Department of Justice, where I've been, and sort of, these are some of my favorite kind of cases. These are the kind of cases where this is why I became a prosecutor. I'm working with people like Kelvin, and it's fun to play offense. I did the defense at the large law firm. And it's valuable, and it's important to have an adversarial system, but it is fun to play offense. It's fun to sit with federal agents, FBI agents, and sort of put together an investigative plan and discuss the steps you're going to take, and think about what the universe of facts is going to be and what steps we will need to take to get the evidence. And
so there's tough parts, though, right? Too, there's good fun parts, but there's tough parts. So
sure,
for those of folks who haven't done it, what are the tough parts? Like for example, I remember after a trial realizing after a conviction what was going to happen next for the first time. So like what's the toughest part of what you do?
Wendy, you bring that up, and that is the hardest, at least for me as a prosecutor. That is the hardest part that you don't get until you've done it, and that is the criminal sentencing, especially for an individual defendant. Now, I say it's the hardest part, but I don't I'm not reluctant to do it because it's a very important part of the process. But you really can't appreciate what it's like to be standing in the well of a courtroom at the government's podium while the defendant, a human being, stands maybe 6 feet from you. You could hear this person breathing. The defendant's lawyers between you, the defendant's family's in the courtroom, and your job as the prosecutor. It's not only your job, your obligation as an attorney, but it's something I personally believe in, is to urge the judge to sentence this person to a period of imprisonment in the Bureau of Prisons. And there will be legal arguments from the government, and there'll be legal arguments from the defense. But ultimately, what we're talking about is a human being. And no human being is as bad as his or her worst day, nor as good as his or her best day. And, the work is important to promote respect for the law and to promote general deterrence. But until you've done that, and Wendy, I know you had a number of roles, within the department in a number of prosecutorial offices. Until you've done it, boy, you don't really get just how pitched and tough that can be. It's really important.
Completely agree. Well, and like you said, the level of seriousness with which you take it is obviously key to being in the role you have, right? You're not taking it lightly what the consequences are.
Absolutely. You don't take it lightly. And you need to be a fair, I always am a fair dealer. I've always been a fair dealer. And I think the department, we try to sort of be clear with the judge. So we're going to give you, during sentencing, we're going to talk about the nature and we're going to talk about the statutory factors. Wendy, you and I, the 3553A factors, the nature and circumstances of the offense.
Hopefully with most of my clients, we're not getting to that point.
Right. The history of the offense, but sort of we're going to try to talk about the whole offense and the whole defendant so that the judge has a whole picture. But it's a very important thing.
So I want to move on to a topic that I think is putting aside even procurement collusion offenses, but generally people these days are really interested in criminal methods and what are the types of facts or red flags that are out there. I know most people are watching these forensic shows or they're kind of watching these like murder mysteries, but I found with antitrust crimes that there were interesting trails. There were patterns that once you saw that people were using bid books or different things. So would love to hear you guys, and maybe I'll start with Kelvin. Like what are the types of red flags that you are seeing with the strike force and the kinds of facts that really are being viewed as like potentially antitrust offenses or procurement offenses?
Sure. And thanks for the question. There are several, and I will tell you some of the ones that I've seen personally when I worked some of my own personal cases that, often when you see multiple bids that are for similar amounts, that's one of the red flags. Another common that I've seen is also when you see bid proposals that are submitted by different competitors, but using the same physical address. And then when you put the two and two together, you say, well, these are supposed to be different, but however, they're coming from the same location. So that, as an investigator, that triggers, a red flag. You're an alert. We have to look at this. And
are you guys seeing maybe both of you, are you seeing this electronically these days or is it paper? I mean, back in the day, this was envelopes, people steaming open envelopes and that kind of thing. But now, are you seeing both paper and electronic when there's bids that are coming in?
But I know I'm seeing both. How about you?
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because, I've seen it more now as we move to the era of more digital. They come more on an electronic form as opposed to paper, and that's as you probably know and everybody knows, we adapt to the crime, so we have to constantly evolve. Crime evolves, and so do we. Here in the FBI, and we've seen it. For example, when you see multiple proposals that are being submitted by the same competitor, but that representing there are different companies. But when you start looking at the behind the document and you look at the metadata, that's when you start putting the two and two together and seeing, well, you know what? They're supposed to be different. However, when you look at the digital evidence behind the document, it's all one individual. And we have to constantly adapt and learn. And this is a constant challenge.
And we are constantly adapting and learning. I don't want your listeners to think, Wendy, that everyone has jumped headlong into the 21st century. We still have people submitting who are putting things out for bid on paper. I had a case really recently, not too long ago, where the bids were submitted, handwritten bids on paper. And when you were to put these two bids ostensibly from competing,
it's the same handwriting.
It's the same handwriting. Wendy, it's not the same handwriting. Like, they didn't even try hiding it. They have very distinct ways of doing their sevens and their ones and their zeros. And the only thing that's different is the signature at the bottom of the bid. And sort of as our investigation progressed, we were able to actually see where the sort of the genesis of that. And when we get enough evidence to get probable cause, we actually get to see the email that says, "Here, I filled it out. All you have to do is sign," which is sort of later on in the investigation. We have to start with that red flag of the bids next to each other. But in more modern ways of catching it, I mean, we've seen people who are in bid rigging conspiracies, when they submit their rigged bids to a government agency, accidentally CC their co-conspirators. Which, I mean, and that's sort of like the kind of the goofy way people will get caught. The exact same typos, and you'll see that both on paper or electronic. And sort of, one thing we're really sort of pushing within the government, within the strike force, is data analytics. I mean, the procurement data, that's an asset the government already has, all this procurement data. And we're working to detect the red flags of collusion, to take a closer look at it. A red flag is just that. It's a red flag. A brick is not a wall, right? But a brick is a brick. And so it gives us something to dive a little deeper. And all of the federal agencies that are involved in procurement have a lot that they can look at. And I think, that's going to be sort of, it's Kelvin's talking about, he's right, we adapt. I mean, that's the next level of adaptation. We are definitely there when it comes to looking at the metadata and electronic bidding. And sort of using the data analytics, that's the future of enhancing detection.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And Kelvin picked up on this a little bit, but Dan, maybe I'll come back to you on this. I remember with procurement fraud and or collusion, like it either could be fraud and or bidding that I had when I was at the division. Sometimes the ways that the leads came in the door were really different than the big international cartel cases that had leniency. Just for example, I remember there could be cases like Kelvin was saying with a whistleblower, or they could come with a lead that just wasn't necessarily leniency, where it was somebody who had seen something maybe at a smaller scale. And I remember thinking that these were investigations where you could kind of get someone that would just scratch the surface, and then that the ways that the investigations were built sometimes might be different than with a international kind of leniency cartel case. Is that do you agree with that, or are there any ways that these investigations are built that or have leads that might be different than your typical leniency setting?
I think I would divide sort of leniency versus not, and I don't think it matters procurement versus not, because something coming in the leniency context is going to just sort of function a little different than the non-leniency context. And whether it's a procurement case where we're talking about a local or state or even the federal government, or it's a price fixing case in the private sector, if it's proactive, it's proactive. And if we have a lead, whether it's come into the division, or we have agents we work with, we've trained, our strike force has trained, thousands of agents and procurement people who are aware of our violation of the work we're doing. Proactive is proactive, and there's really, I think it's hard for one size to fit all. I mean, some of our procurement cases are they are sort of the smaller, one city, one industry, one trade, but we have some that are big by any number or by any way you measure, whether it's the dollars or the scope. I mean, we have the insulation cases out of our New York office. That's in New England. That's a $45 million fraud scheme. Security services, which is a relatively recent investigation. The one contract for the people who walk the perimeter at a U.S. Army base, $77 million. There's something we call SACON, the San Antonio Construction Contracts. It's a construction set aside for disabled veterans. It's $250 million in construction contracts. I mean, they're coming in a lot of different sizes. So.
And are you, let me ask you this, in terms of the the cases, I am recalling that these cases were a really great opportunity, and we have a lot of listeners who are newer lawyers. My recollection is that these cases were a really great way for newer antitrust division prosecutors to really do nuts and bolts, to get the fundamental skills of building an investigation. And then, because they weren't always the most gigantic cases, but they were really important, they still had harm, they still had victims, that they could take them to trial, right? That they basically, maybe it's a 3 or 4 person case versus a 15-person case. Is that still true at the division?
I think there's some truth to that. I mean, that wasn't necessarily the reason we started the strike force. It's not, but that's certainly a sort of a nice secondary benefit. It's a nice feature. I mean, you do get that benefit on something that's in the antitrust division. Our cases really do run the gamut from the nine-figure leniency matters. Although we have a 9-figure strike force matter. To the very small, very, very local, and generally the smaller, the more local. That's a place for a younger attorney to really make herself sort of get a place to where she can take the lead, really develop those chops, really kind of build the relationships with the agents, get those hard skills, get those soft skills, really kind of deal with a number, sort of the whole investigation, soup to nuts. From lead intake to that charging to getting in the grand jury, getting that indictment, and then taking it to trial if that's what the defendant, if the defendant exercises, his or her right, and that is absolutely their right. It's a great opportunity, and it's also just a tremendous amount of fun. And these smaller cases, I always, I think that motivates me are some of our victims in these procurement cases. We had an investigation. We had one investigation into one construction trade in one city. It was a recent investigation. The universe of potential victims included school districts. There was a school district that only provided services to special needs children, and another school district that was so impoverished that they just didn't figure out who needed free lunch and free textbooks because it was just more efficient to just give them to everyone. These are victims sort of in the world of white collar procurement fraud. These are as vulnerable as the victims get. Yeah, and I mean, even if it's the going rate, the going number of what bid rigging costs is about 20% is what it adds to the bottom line. These are not victims that can afford an extra 20%. That's a 20% they are not spending instructing children. I mean, you talk about sort of why did you become a prosecutor? Why did Kelvin become a special agent? Why you want to help victims? I mean, these are really, really meaningful cases, and I think our folks are definitely responding, well to them because they see the value in it.
So I have one more question for Kelvin about the FBI. So you're at the ICU. What is that? Is that international? Is that in the U.S.? What does that mean? Because I actually think when I was at the DOJ, it wasn't around, and then at some point in time, it came to be around.
Okay, so I'll give you a little overview of our unit. So ICU stands for International Corruption Unit, and we are under the Criminal Investigative Division, Public Corruption Civil Rights Section. And our unit is fairly new. We were formed, I believe, around 2015. We have squads in Los Angeles. We also have squads in Washington, D.C., New York, and our new squad is in Miami, who got formed in 2019. But we also have a presence overseas in different locations, South America, Europe. And what ICU is in the context of antitrust, we're the liaison between the FBI and the Department of Justice. So I work with them. I talk to them very frequently about the PCSF cases. When there's an issue, I talk to them, and so we partner with them and we talk to them very frequently. Our main role in the FBI ICU is we provide resources to the field agents, just to make sure that they have what they need to succeed in their cases. We also provide them training, so we make sure that the agents, the forensic accountants, to the analysts, know what is an antitrust case and the elements of these cases. identifying the flags and things like that.
So Kelvin, so you guys some of you are overseas. The reason I ask is I remember at some point it was in a country that will remain unnamed, running into, I think, some member of the ICU and not knowing that you guys had taken it global. So some of you are, like you said, in other countries.
Correct. We are.
And looking for crimes, I presume. Oh, John, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say it's remarkable how international the Procurement Strike Force is. Because I'm thinking of a couple of cases that I've read about in the in press releases, and I know of one recently in Europe. I'm thinking of another that I might have heard about in Asia. So it is remarkably. We talk about the cartel being international, but the procurement, the Strike Force also seems to have a real international dimension to it.
That's a good point, John. Again, people maybe start with procurement. They think paper clips and supply, right? I mean, that's sort of the easy, the quick and easy example. But yeah, the United States spends all kinds of money in all kinds of places. If you think about what our global footprint is, whether it's we have embassies in 150 plus countries, we have military bases, other installations, and one of the cases you're probably referencing, John, is the relatively recent security services investigation, which is a U.S. Army base located in Belgium, and out of which we've had a couple of guilty pleas and a number of indictments. And essentially, part of what we're looking at and working with Kelvin and the FBI, there are partners as well as other agencies that are our partners in the PCSF, is really training and building a network of agents overseas who can look for this and work these types of matters, work these types of investigations. Because one of the things that was sort of we call it our Big Bang moment, our Garden of Eden, was an earlier investigation where a number of oil refiners and fuel refiners and suppliers were rigging the bids for all of the jet fuel that was being sold to the U.S. government to a military installation in a country in Asia.
Wow!
And I'll tell you, you mentioned the security services case, and I'll tell you from our point of view, the point here at the FBI, the success of these cases is not just the FBI. It's like working with the different partners, working with the Department of Defense, OIG, working with Homeland Security, and that's what makes these cases a success.
So, Dan and Kelvin, just a question for you. In the past, have you had any procurement collusion cases involved where the people charged were both U.S. Citizens or U.S. kind of residents, as well as people who were overseas?
Yes, absolutely. You can look at our recent security services case. You can see that some of the individuals who were charged either by information or charged by indictment after the grand jury returned the indictment are foreign nationals who were engaged in conduct. The same was true in the Korea Fuels case that we were talking about earlier.
And I think kind of one last bit that potentially maybe we'll get you a tip off of the podcast. So if you had to say to folks, if they need to keep their eyes peeled and their ears out there for any crimes, what should they be looking for? What's the kind of tip that they should bring to you if they see or hear?
So the basic mantra, right, is see something, say something. So you're asking, well, okay, what's the something? And I think it goes back to anything suggesting that competitors are anything but, that they're not competing, but instead colluding on government business. Report the suspicions. If there's some of the things we talked about, if you're in the procurement space, if you're a procurement officer and you're getting docs, or you're looking at metadata like Kelvin was describing, you're saying, well, wait a minute, these two companies may be working together. That's a tip. Or if you were a government contractor and you know about, or you've heard about, or you've been invited in, and you don't want to have something to do with that would be the kind of reporting. And I think especially for those in the government contracting space, I hope they realize, and I know their lawyers who are probably listening here realize, but the enforcement focus and the dynamic, there's just now this kind of constellation that really makes it more likely than before that there's going to be detection. We're generating cases differently. They're coming in different ways. We've got data analytics. We've trained a bunch of procurement officers. There's the new whistleblower protection for those who report antitrust violations to the government. Our leniency program, still the gold standard, still the best deal, still going. There's the compliance programs and all the incentives sort of after the 2019 revision to the division's policy. And sort of there's the tip line, the sort of, Wendy, what do you want people to say? We're taking tips. The lines are now open, as they used to say in the commercials. So, there's a lot of the constellation, as I said, is really kind of aligned in a very particular way.
So this is really interesting stuff. I've actually learned quite a bit today. And Dan, Kelvin, I actually am pretty sure this is not an area of enforcement that's going to go away anytime soon, unfortunately. And I think great insight. Thanks for teaching us a little bit about that. We shift gears a little bit, and maybe Kelvin, start with you. Can you tell us something interesting about yourself that we wouldn't know if we only knew you through the podcast or only knew you professionally? Okay.
So people who know me here at work, they'll say that I'm very type A. So I'm always like running around, and when I was in the field, I was the kind of agent that had 15 cases, and I was running things that probably search warrant here and like doing large cases here and there. But something that people might not realize is when I'm at home, I'm the opposite. I am pretty mellow. I go for a run. I go home to my home and I watch a movie. I'm pretty mellow. So that's something that I think people who see me at work think that I'm always like 24/7 running around, and I do not. I do it from 9 to 5, and then I go home and I chill. I crash.
So your neighbor's like him, an FBI agent?
Correct. Yeah. And yeah.
No way.
Absolutely. So yeah.
And listening to like cool jazz and stuff like that. Do you get that mellow, or
except when I'm running. When I'm running, I turn it up and I listen to maybe like a little more heavy rock. But that it keeps me moving. It keeps me moving. And the people who know me, they know that I love like my pre-workout. So the people who see me when I'm prepping to go for my run at the end of my workday, they know they can smell the powder because I'm prepping for my run. So,
Dan, what about you?
Well, I've already revealed that as a much younger man, I worked at an asphalt plant in a gravel pit. So I think a lot of people probably wouldn't know that they now do. This is kind of interesting. I am actually in the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, or to be more precise, a portion of my head is in the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off for a split second during the parade scene. I was about 5 years old when it was filmed.
Oh, now I'm going to watch that again to see where.
You're going to have to look really, really quickly, Wendy, because it's really basically my forehead and my hair. But you can see, I know that it's me because you can clearly see my mother and my sister clear as day. I was very short. I was 5, and you can really just kind of see the top of my head.
Do you get any royalties from that?
That's what I was going to say.
But I do get asked for autographs, and I always give because I'm a...
Signed small boy in the corner of the screen.
And that I did not know about. So let's go to our final segment, The Curious Hat.
And now it's time for The Curious Hat.
When we're together, we usually have a hat and people pull a question out of the hat. But since we're not together, I have a list of questions, and on my list, they're numbered 1 to 25. So choose a number, and we're gonna do the same question for both of you. So Dan, choose a number, and I will ask you the question that corresponds with that number.
17.
Okay, question 17. We just replaced question 17. So let me see if okay. Okay, this is about movies. What is your maybe Dan will start with you. What is your favorite movie moment or television moment that involves antitrust?
Ooh, good question. Hard question because I've got a couple, believe it or not. But I think my current favorite is a clip from The Sopranos. It's this great clip. It's only about a minute and a half long, and I won't repeat it here because true to Sopranos fashion, it gets a little blue. But if I remember it correctly, it's Tony Soprano, who's the boss of the family, meeting with his lieutenant, his capos, on a riverside somewhere in northern New Jersey, and they're talking about the fact that a bunch of townships in northern New Jersey have just put out their garbage bid, their garbage contracting bids, and they're all talking about who gets what. And they're talking about Nutley, New Jersey, Patterson, New Jersey, Fairfield Township, New Jersey. And there's a little bit of jockeying among these different crews and different compos of who gets what. And so Tony, as the boss, has to settle the dispute and tells them, this is why we have a fixed bid club. And they're really talking about, what they're really talking about, and I can sort of tease out, like it doesn't take long, like they're talking about a geographic allocation that is probably implemented through complementary bidding. And if I had to hazard a guess, probably enforced with threats of and then actual acts of violence for anyone who steps out of line. I mean, it really kind of has it all. I think it's a great little clip. And you get all that in about a minute and a half.
Who knew the Sopranos had thought about a geographic allocation and Kelvin, what about you? What's favorite movie, TV moment involving antitrust?
Okay, so for me, I love movies that are based on true story. So the one that I recall, it's War Dogs, which is Jonah Hill. It's in the movie. And it's funny because I've seen the movie maybe 7 times since it came out, but it wasn't until maybe recently this year when I joined headquarters and I started watching the movie. And now that I'm doing the work, then I'm the program manager for Antitrust, that it really caught my attention. A segment in the movie where Jonah Hill is on the phone and he's in his office and his associate is sitting in the couch, and Jonah Hill is on the phone talking to a competitor, and he's impersonating an army procurement officer. And during the conversation, he's like trying to get information from his competitors so that he can bid on a $300 million contract for military ammunition. And, the people who have seen the movie know that they were convicted. And for me, it touches home on 2 ways. One, it's a true story movie. And 2, is that it was an FBI case. So it kind of touches home, and it kind of shows like what we can do. And also, like, similar to the PCSF, it's case that we worked, the FBI, in conjunction with our partners, with the Department of Defense. Once again, and I say it a lot, and it's, we cannot do this by ourselves. We work with our partners, and this is how it gets like done. But yeah, this is the movie, and yeah.
Okay, Kelvin. So before we go, if anyone has a tip, how do they find you? What's the number? How do they get you? Okay,
that's an excellent question. So we encourage everyone, the public, corporations, when they come across anything that looks like anti-competitive behavior, bid rigging, price fixing, we encourage everyone to contact the FBI. And there are a number of ways they can do that. There is the FBI.gov/tips. And that's a way that they can get to our online internet complaint center. That's a way they can provide an online tip. If they prefer in person, they can always go to our FBI local field office, and they can talk to an agent there in person. So there are 2 ways that they can provide the complaints.
We'll see you next time on Our Curious Amalgam.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.